of the trial, we're joined by MSNBC legal analyst Lisa Bloom, Alex Ferrer, who's a former Florida Circuit Court judge, and Myrna White, who's a former criminal defense attorney. I want to get in a moment to what went on with Trayvon Martin's father and his testimony, but let's deal with the toxicology that we just heard from Craig. Lisa, I presume that this will be billed as a victory for the prosecution because now that evidence comes in. Wouldn't pot more instinctively make somebody seem more docile? I mean, intuitively, I say that makes Trayvon Martin less the aggressor.
That's right. The defense has been the one fighting to get this in, and especially after the medical examiner changed his testimony last Friday, it opened the door and they got to argue again. But isn't most people's common experience with marijuana that it makes you less aggressive, more relaxed? So I don't know ultimately if this is really going to help the defense at all.
Alex, are they misreading it? Is the defense misreading this by wanting to get that into evidence?
I don't think they're going to get it in for the purpose of arguing that he got high so he became violent, because I think that it kind of strains all credibility. However, in the opening statement and throughout the case, we've heard the tape being played of the call to the police where George Zimmerman says there's a strange guy, he's walking between the houses, he looks like he's high on drugs or something, and this tends to corroborate that he wasn't just making stuff up because he was watching a black male. He was actually reporting something that, lo and behold, he does seem to be high on something. In fact, they did argue that in the video from the 7-Eleven or whatever, he seemed to be swaying a little bit, which was consistent.
Myrna, isn't there a risk, though, for the defense that there could be blowback if this is viewed as nothing but an effort to sully the man who's no longer here?
Absolutely, because the amount of marijuana in his system, we don't know how much was in the system as it is, and was that enough in his system to make him act out? And I agree with Lisa. Generally, when people are taking marijuana, it is a docile, more mellow type of feel, not of aggressor or aggression.
And these are trace amounts, I want to emphasize.
Very small.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, there were other big developments today. Trayvon Martin's father, Tracy Martin, was called to the stand and delivered a stunning piece of testimony. Prior to Martin taking the stand, we heard from two detectives who said that they heard Martin say that it wasn't his son's voice screaming for help in the background of a neighbor's 911 call. Their testimony echoed a police report which said, quote, "I asked Mr. Martin if the voice calling for help was that of his son. Mr. Martin, clearly emotionally impacted by the recording, quietly responded no." Here's the exchange when defense attorney Mark O'Mara asked Tracy Martin about that.
Do you recall Officer Serino asking you whether or not you could identify your son's voice?
Not those exact words, but something to that nature, yes.
Okay. Do you recall the words as best you can recall that he used?
As best as I recall, after he played the tape, he basically just said, "Do you recognize the voice?"
And what was your response?
My response was as simple. I didn't tell him that I didn't know. I didn't tell him no, that wasn't Trayvon. I think the chairs had wheels on them, and I kind of pushed away from the table and just kind of shook my head and said, "I can't tell."
So your words were, "I can't tell."
Something to that effect, but I never said, no, that wasn't my son's voice.
I thought the attempt, Lisa, at rehabilitation by the prosecution was pretty effective when essentially they brought out of the man that he didn't want to accept, given the rawness of the emotions in the immediate aftermath, didn't want to accept at that juncture that his son had passed.
This was totally unnecessary for the defense to put Tracy Martin on the stand. They already had two police officers saying that he denied it. This was not necessary at all. I think this is the second biggest blunder the defense has made, only after putting George Zimmerman on Hannity, where he said that the killing of Trayvon Martin was God's plan.
Does it, Myrna, all come down to a jury's determination of who they believe that voice is? Whomever the voice is was not the aggressor. Consequently, it could sway the entire outcome of the case, or is that too dramatic?
I think it's too dramatic. I think it's a number of issues, in the jury's determination of who the aggressor was. They have witnesses that said, "We saw the lighter man on the bottom," and another witness said that we saw the darker man on the top. So I think it's not just, and I think that the defense is belaboring that point, and like Lisa says, it's not necessary. I think it did more good for the prosecution because it brought on an emotional Tracy Martin, and after coming to the station, not knowing why he was coming, not to hear a recording, thinking that maybe he was going to gather his son's things, he's very emotional. He's distraught. He's trying to come to grips with the terms that his son was just murdered. So I think that they're really just belaboring that point, and that the jury's, that's not going to be the deciding factor for the jury.
Alex, let me call on your experience as a former Florida judge, some believe that there was overcharging in this case and that the prosecution is going to have difficulty in meeting its burden with regard to a second-degree murder charge. How difficult will it be for the prosecution, if they can't win second degree, to nevertheless get a manslaughter conviction?
Well, it's not difficult, really. I mean, the same argument was made in the Casey Anthony case, and I disagree with it as well. Some people say you overcharge and the jury ends up losing confidence in you. But the reality is they're going to be instructed on the lesser, and it really is easy for a prosecutor to get up there and say, look, we've proven second-degree murder, look at these elements. But if for some reason you don't agree, we certainly have proven manslaughter. So I don't think it hurts them at all. If they did something outrageous, if they charged something ridiculous that's not even remotely supported by the evidence, then they lose total credibility, and then it might hurt them. But this was a close call.
The defense's day was built around testimony from Zimmerman's friends and colleagues who all say it's his voice screaming for help in the background of the 911 call.
Do you know whose voice that is in the background screaming?
Yes, definitely. It's Georgie.
I thought it was George.
Okay. And tell me why you think that.
Just the tone, just the volume and the tone of what I was hearing, and it just sounded like George.
I recognized his voice. I'd heard him speak many times. I have no doubt in my mind that's his voice.
Whose voice is it?
George Zimmerman's voice.
There's absolutely no doubt in my mind that is George Zimmerman. And I wish to God I did not have that ability to understand that.
Lisa, given the totality of that testimony, is that why you believe it was unnecessary to call Trayvon Martin's father to the stand at the end of the day?
No, I think because the two police officers had already said that Trayvon Martin's father said, "It's not my son." You know, I have in my mind Mark O'Mara's cross-examination of Trayvon Martin's mother, where he planted the idea that you have to hope it's your loved one calling out because the alternative is unacceptable. And that applies, I think, to all of these witnesses who care very much about George Zimmerman on one side or care very much about Trayvon Martin on the other side. I'm not saying that they're lying. I mean, probably some of them are right. Some of them have to be right. It's one or the other. But those who are wrong are probably hoping in good faith that they're gone.
And isn't one of the issues, Alex, that none of those who've testified were familiar with both voices? Right. You know, we've got individuals who are familiar with one or they're familiar with the other, but they don't know both.
Not only that, more importantly, I don't think any of them are familiar with either voice in a panic scream for your life mode. I think that they are friends. They want to believe. If they're right, they're probably right coincidentally, not because they ever heard their voice in a screaming for your life mode. So I really think that the jury could latch on to one or another. It's not going to be because of quantity. It's not because, well, they presented 7 and you presented 2, so we're going to go with 7. It's not going to be that. But they may just wash them and say, you know what, I don't think we know whose voice is on that, but let's look at the other evidence.
You know, I fully recognize it only matters what 6 women who are sitting in that courtroom are thinking of this case, but we're all paying very close attention. So let me just quickly ask each of you, as it stands today, how has the case gone in for the prosecution and the defense? Myrna, you're first.
I think for the prosecution, I think it's gone in well for the prosecution. I know many people beg to differ and say that the prosecution's case is primarily circumstantial and, there's no reasonable doubt. But I think that based on what they have, the information that they have, I think that they put on the best case that they could possibly.
Alex, you agree with that?
I am one of the people who would beg to differ. I think that the prosecution's case is very weak, not because it's circumstantial. I have no problem with circumstantial cases, but because every witness they called became a defense witness. They gave more for the defense on some occasions than the prosecution got. I don't believe they've proven second-degree murder. I don't know that they can prove manslaughter because the self-defense evidence that's in the record already, without the defense finishing, is very strong.
By your analysis, should the defense have even put on a case?
Oh, yes, because if he gets convicted of manslaughter, it's 30 years maximum in state prison. So I think that they are right to put on a case. In fact, I think the ME that's going to be coming, Vincent DeMaio, is going to help the defense's case tremendously as far as the lack of injuries on the knuckles of Trayvon.
Lisa Bloom, where are we by your eye?
So I have watched almost every minute of this trial. I would say 99% of it. I have reviewed all of the evidence, some of it multiple times. And I didn't come into this with any preconceived ideas, gunning for one side or the other. I thought the prosecution began slowly and many of the witnesses were turned for the defense. But I think that they've really picked up steam and they've established a lot of serious inconsistencies in George Zimmerman's story. This is not a case where you can hold up one soundbite and say, see, he's guilty. It takes pulling the threads together and a very strong closing argument. But I got to tell you, when George Zimmerman said on that Hannity interview, as I've said, that it was God's plan, that really is a sour note. When you look at the evidence like the fact that the gun was holstered inside his waistband behind him. The gun is black, the holster is black, it's a dark night, and supposedly Trayvon Martin saw it and reached for it, which seems almost a physical impossibility.
But they really haven't, you know, you've noted that, and I think it's a great observation. They really haven't made note of that in the trial, at least thus far.
Yeah, I hope the operative word is yet.
Three great analyses. Thank you so much for being here. Lisa Bloom, Alex Ferrer, and Myrna White. Coming up, what happened?